Hello, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey everyone, welcome back to the office. It's time for another episode of Hypothesis, and today's episode I've been looking forward to for a very long time. If anyone knows me, they know that one of my favorite movies is The Mummy, and fingers crossed that this new Mummy movie actually happens. It keeps being rumored, and they keep talking about it. I don't know. I will go crazy. I will be that weird millennial that's dressing up and waiting to see the midnight showing. But that being said, ancient Egypt has always been one of those topics that's really interested me, and I've always wanted to learn more. I know some of the mythology, but not enough. And most of my knowledge about ancient Egypt comes from Moon Knight and the Mummy and modern American media, which, I'm not going to trust those sources. But today's guest, we can in fact trust as a source. So today we're going to talk about historical roots of Egyptology. We're going to talk about what it's like studying Egyptology both in Egypt and in the UK. Especially because my guest is Egyptian, so getting to talk about what it's like as an Egyptian studying your own ancient history. And then we're also going to talk about how colonialism affects that field of research because colonialism has, made a fool out of all of us. So it's a really, really incredible conversation. And my guest today is Hassan Elzawy. Hassan is a PhD student in Egyptology. Elzawy graduated with a BA in Egyptology and Marketing from the American University in Cairo. He was awarded the Chevening Scholarship to pursue his MA in Egyptian Archaeology and Heritage at University College London, where he specialized in settlement archaeology. Elzawy was awarded the Margaret Murray Award for his dissertation research from UCL, and he has worked for over 8 years on various cultural projects, publications, museums, and archaeological excavations. These experiences have allowed him to merge his passion for Egyptian culture, both ancient and modern, with his interests in domestic spaces, social identities, food production, gender, and transmission of culture. He was recently featured in GQ Middle East Cairo Community Profile on Rising Egyptians in the Creative Field. Everyone, please help me welcome Hassan Elzawy.
So you can hear me okay? Just making sure that I did it correctly because I've never done it
Yeah.
on my laptop before
Yes. Yeah, I
for
can
this
hear you.
concept. So
Great.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I also recently got my little microphone things that I can use
Okay.
for TikTok,
Oh,
and there was a learning curve with those.
yeah. Which one? Which one did you get? Because I actually don't like this one. But like I didn't necessarily buy a fancy one. But yeah, I've been finding it better to record my reels without it sometimes,
Mm,
where it just does all of this like echoing thing. I don't know. I just want to get
no,
something.
I I just got like the 30 euro cheap one on Amazon. So
Okay. And you got the
so it's probably
magnet
not the
thing?
best, but it works fairly well, and it came with like the little like fuzzy thing that you put on it.
Oh,
But
nice. But yeah,
um
it's definitely a learning curve. I think one
oh
time
yeah.
I didn't have it turned on, like here the button that you click. So like I had it attached to my phone, so it kind of cancels out a normal voice. I was just like sat there yapping, and then there was like no voice. So I didn't press the on button, but yeah, it can happen.
Oh no. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know grad school is a lot, and you just started teaching.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. No, thank you for having me. And it's just good to have like something different to do. That's like more casual, I think,
Oh
in
yeah.
in the busy schedule. So, I'm very
Oh
happy to be
yeah. Well, just to kind of start us off, I was wondering if you could just kind of talk through your education journey, because you've gone to some really interesting schools and gotten some great degrees. So just how did you get to the PhD level and why and all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, so I'm from Egypt, so I think it was very easy for me to like be, or easier to be like very interested in Egyptology just because of like it was very stimulating to be in Egypt and see all of these monuments. I never necessarily wanted to be an Egyptologist per se. Like I think I also didn't know what an Egyptologist was up until high school. So like growing up, I wanted to be a tour guide or a history teacher. And it wasn't until like I was applying for undergrad programs that I found like Egyptology as like an option. And I was like, oh, like I didn't know this was like a thing. And that's when like I kind of had a different trajectory where like I was like, oh, I want to because I'm not necessarily a historian. Like I love history, but like I am passionate about ancient Egypt and ancient Egypt only, if that makes sense. Which is not very insular because I think ancient Egypt is like 3,000 years of history if you think about it, plus
Yeah.
plus. So it's not like an insular, I'm only focused on like 18th century modern painting, which nothing is wrong with that, but I'm just saying like I'm not an insular field. But yeah, and then in undergrad, I went to the American University in Cairo because it was like the only liberal arts university available in Cairo, where it had more flexibility. And also like I didn't want to just do Egyptology because it's such a precarious field. You really don't know what you're gonna do with it after you graduate. And my parents also were kind of like hesitant to let me just do Egyptology. So I actually ended up doing a double major. I did marketing and Egyptology as an undergrad. So I spent 5 years in school instead of four. So just did an extra year of coursework. Graduated, still didn't know what I was going to do with Egyptology, but I mean, th things work out. I mean, I feel like if you just do your part and like hope for the best, like sometimes things work out. So I was very glad, I was very fortunate to like get a job in Egyptology after I finished my undergrad for 4 years and then went and did my master's at UCL. The program was in Egyptian archaeology and heritage, and I had like Commonwealth scholarship to go and study there. So that was like another year, which was really cool. And I think it's just like the beginning of like elevating and honing my skill set as like a researcher and just like was a really great experience. And the UK is very known for like applying a lot of theoretical frameworks into Egyptology. So that also gave me like a different angle to like looking at the material that we have, trying to kind of connect the pieces together within like larger sociological, anthropological frameworks that we don't necessarily engage with as much as Egyptologists, which I think was really cool. And then like the normal trajectory again within Egyptology, it's always like, oh, you have to get a PhD for you to get like a museum job, or you have to always get a PhD. Like an undergrad for us is never seen as a terminal degree. You have to get them. Like I don't think I was taken seriously in my discipline until I got my master's, and that still was like, come on, Hassan, like when's the PhD coming? And I never really wanted to do anything because society tells me I have to do it. Like if I didn't feel like the PhD was for me, I wasn't gonna do it. And it's such a big commitment, especially from the outside. You like are so concerned about the commitment and like if you're gonna get into a good program and how hard it's gonna be. So I didn't want to commit like 5 to 6 years of my life to something that I wasn't convinced with. But when I moved back to Egypt after my master's, I was working at the Ministry of Antiquities and I was also working at the American Research Center in Egypt after that as an archivist. But I just felt like something was not being satisfied for me. Like I was craving more. And I was also almost 30 at the time. And then I was like, okay, Hassan, this is like giving like crossroad moment where like you have to figure out if this is something you want to continue in or not. Because there like something about what I was doing, at least currently, that wasn't satisfying me. So I just sat with myself for a bit and then I realized that what I want to do is I want to ask questions and I want to be in an environment where I can get paid to answer these questions. And I was like, okay, what mode, what format would allow me to ask questions that I want to ask and also give me funding to be able to answer these questions and hopefully present it to like at least a room full of people. And that's how the PhD came about because again I wanted it to be a conscious decision that is good for Hassan and not necessarily because every Egyptologist or every good Egyptologist has to get a PhD, then I have to get a PhD. Like that maybe that's someone else's like narrative or story, but I just didn't want it to be mine because also like I can never do anything good, like well, that I'm not convinced with or that I don't actually like or I'm passionate about. Like I can never do this to myself. So I'm also conscious of that. So I just didn't want to get into something that would ultimately end up in failure because I wasn't 100% sure about it. So yeah, that's how it kind of came about. And then even when I was applying to graduate programs, everyone was telling me you have to apply to like top tier, mid tier, low tier universities. You just get accepted anywhere and go into any program. And again, I was like, no, that's not gonna happen. Like, why would I do that? Like, because especially with PhDs, like I'm a true believer that there is no such thing as a good or bad university. I think it all depends on what your research interests are. And they don't have to be concrete. Oh my God, I'm going to do XYZ and test EBC. Like it could be just something as simple as a time period or a generic topic for Egyptology at least, or an artifact or something. And based on that, kind of see where the different professors that have similar interests to you are teaching. And I specialize in settlement archaeology. That's what I did my master's on, and that's what hopefully I'll be doing my PhD thesis on as well. So like ancient cities, domestic spaces, and such. And the two best in North America are at Penn and at Yale. So I was like, oh, I'm only applying to Yale and Penn because that's only the places that make sense to me as Hassan. I think maybe someone who wants to do like, I don't know, funerary New Kingdom practices would tell you a different university. So not to take away from any other programs, these are just the two programs that felt that I could learn the most from, given the research interests of the faculty that were teaching there 2023 when I was applying. And this is only the only two schools I applied to. I got into both, thankfully. And then after like much thought, and then they also like when you get in programs, at least in North America, like you come and pay them like campus visits. So after the campus visits, I think I just like lean more towards Yale, and here we are.
I mean, that's really impressive that you only applied to two programs and you got in, and they're both like top programs in
Yeah.
the world.
But
But
also I think
also,
yeah.
oh, I was just gonna say it's also fun that you went to the American University in Cairo because I went to the American University of Paris and we're
Oh,
sister
we're sister
institutions.
universities. Yeah,
And there are only a few of us schools out there. So,
I
and I haven't
know.
met anyone from any of the others. So it's cool that
Oh,
we have
were
that.
you there for undergrad?
No, for grad school. I just graduated
Sure.
there last year.
Oh, that's so
Last year.
cool.
Time is not something I'm
Huh.
aware of anymore. Um, but but also just something that struck me when you were talking, a question that came to mind is studying Egyptology as someone from Egypt in Egypt
Mm-hmm.
must be very different than studying Egyptology in the UK, especially with its history of colonialism and uh, how they've come come to Egyptology, like their purposes for Egyptology historically.
Mm-hmm.
What was that difference like? Was there still a difference?
No, definitely. And I think I was very lucky and fortunate to have had my foundational years in Egypt because, like, for example, like in art history class, like we would like not go to class, but then go to the Egyptian Museum and have our classes at the Egyptian Museum. And like we wouldn't need PowerPoint presentations. Like we're in the space, we're with the artifacts. Like everything was so accessible to us. We had so many field trips to not only like the Giza pyramids or the Sahara necropolis, like but like we went to like Dahshur, we went to like to see the Fayoum pyramids. We camped in the White and Black Desert and saw all of these like desert sites. So I was very, very fortunate to have Number one, very active professors who really wanted to engage with the students beyond their classrooms because it also has to come from the faculty themselves. But it was so accessible to us, which was amazing. And then I think it felt very empowering as well to like be like part of that long history
Mm.
as an Egyptian, if that makes sense. And I'm not claiming like, oh, I'm like the grandson of like Ramses III or whatever. Like like a big part of my research is also about identity, and I don't really believe in like ethnic identities as much as like socially constructed identities. And in my opinion, and again, studying Egyptology, there is so much in modern Egyptian culture and tradition that is actually that you can actually trace back to ancient Egypt that I think not a lot of even Egyptians are aware of because I wasn't aware of it until I
Mm.
started studying it. And I think that there's a kind of a continuous line of like thought almost between ancient Egypt and modern Egypt. And that's why I feel modern Egyptians are part of ancient Egypt and part of the long history of Egypt itself, like Coptic Egypt, Islamic Egypt, like not exclusively ancient Egypt, just because of that continuous like cultural line that you can kind of trace from thousands of years ago up until today. And in the UK or like even here in the US, it's so interesting because I remember when I first started my program at UCL, one student was like, "Oh, why are you studying Egyptology here? Like that's so weird." And I was like, "Have you been to the British Museum? Like, what do you mean? Why am I studying Egyptology? You guys took everything, and now you're asking me why I'm coming." So there's always a lot of like questioning of like, "Oh, why are you here? Like, why don't you go to Egypt?" But then
Mm.
also like we don't have like as many great opportunities in terms of like higher level educational institutions. Like we don't have like, for example, PhD in my undergrad university programs. And like here in the US, you have so many. In Germany, you have a lot. In the UK and France, because Egypt was not part of the academic conversation, if you think about it, up until the 1950s, almost, when for the first time ever, so like up until the 1953 revolution, the head of the antiquities in Egypt had to be a French person. So up until the 50s, we weren't even the heads of our own local like modes of governance, which is crazy. But then come 70 years later, like we're coming very late to the game, so we don't have as like these like 200 year old institutions or foundations or centers dedicated to the study of ancient Egypt, in Egypt at least. So I think it's
Mm.
usually I'm met with either why are you here or oh I'm so happy that like we've never had an Egyptian or you're the first Egyptian in a couple of years or oh we like I'm the only Egyptian in the cohort or whatever. So it's usually met with like confusion, but then happiness, but then also like I'm always worry of like that happiness because it can also turn into tokenism in a way where it's like, oh, we're such a progressive program. Look at our diverse student body. But thankfully that has never happened to me, but it's just like something that I'm conscious of in the back of my mind. And again, I think I am much more fortunate in being able to have access to all of the spaces that we engage with in the classroom physically. Because I'm a very visual person. For example, like up until I went to Luxor with my department, I always used to confuse Luxor and Karnak Temple. Like I just always used to confuse them, even though like they're very clearly different and it's very easy to distinguish between both. But even as an undergrad, I just did not, I would always get them confused. I was like, oh, which is which again? Or I forgot which one is which. And it wasn't until I got there that I was like, oh, wow, like this is okay, this is that. Also, just understanding the size of things. Like I feel when, like, regardless of how many maps or plans or pictures you see, when you're there, like when you're there seeing the stuff, feeling it, like, and also like the aura, the vibe of the place. And I'm also really into like landscape design and landscape archaeology. And it's very important to not look at these like sites as like isolated, isolated monuments, but they're part of a larger landscape. And again, you don't like no picture can do it justice, no video can do it justice. You really have to be there and like feel the energy. Not in like I'm talking to Ra or Amun or whatever way, but just like feel the energy of the
Yeah.
place. So yeah, I think accessibility is very important. And I met a lot of students who are in different levels of their like educational system in Egyptology abroad who had never been to Egypt. which I find mind-boggling. Like I've met PhD students who are finishing their PhDs and they've never been to Egypt. And I understand like traveling is a privilege and everything, but if you're dedicating your life to something like this and it's right there, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, but who am I to judge, I guess. But yeah, I just think being in Egypt in some shape or form is very necessary. And a lot of people do come even if they
Mhm.
don't study, like come to excavate. A lot of not necessarily, not a lot of the UK universities have active excavation sites, as I want to say as much as like American universities, like a lot
Mhm.
of American institutions have multiple active sites in Egypt and Germans as well. So a lot of people also come to excavate, which I think is great. But yeah, I think in my formidable years, I think I would have been a different scholar probably. And also having been taught by Egyptian professors, like learning ancient Egyptian, I learned it with Dr. Faiza Hikal, who's actually the first Egyptian female philologist in Egyptology, and she would sometimes like stop class like when we were translating sometimes like the English translation wouldn't make sense or like would be like, oh, this is so bizarre, like why are they saying this, especially with like letters from like normal people, not like official documents or whatever. And sometimes she would be like, really sorry for the non-Arabic speakers, I'm gonna translate this in Egyptian. And she would say it, and I would be like, wow, like this is like two men having like tea in a coffee shop, having a conversation today. Like their isms and how they're saying things, and like sometimes even the proverbs, you're like, oh wow, like this is so similar. This is number one, also so human. Like this is just like a human conversation beyond the whole the king made an offering to Amun-Ra in the temple of I don't know what. But also another layer is like, wow, they just speak like Egyptians today. So
Mhm.
yeah, I was very, very lucky and fortunate to have that as a foundation and then build on it by being abroad, I guess.
Well, I completely understand what you mean by the heritage of studying those things because I mean, one of the few things that we learn about Egypt when in the States as kids is that there were Egyptologists in ancient Egypt. Like there it's a realm of study that's been around now for thousands of years, which is why it boggles my mind that the French were saying that they had to be in charge of the antiquities until the 50s. Like, I'm sorry, you can't trust a people who have been in charge of these things for thousands of years already to continue to be in charge of those things. I that kind of racism really does not make any sense to me. The ongoing conversations, even like you said, with the British Museum and with the Metropolitan Museum in New York and all of those that have huge Egyptian wings in them, the Louvre, um, when asked to repatriate the things that were stolen, say no, sorry, you wouldn't take care of them as well as we can take care of them. And it is crazy to me considering now Cairo has the world's best history museum.
Literally. And also, I'm sorry, have we seen the news from the Louvre recently? Like this whole narrative of
Literally.
like number one, it's like again, it's a very, very, very colonial orientalist thing to assume that like the West can take care of the East in a way. Also,
Mhm.
like east of what and west of what, that's like another conversation. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's very problematic. And I don't know if you know this, but you know that actually a lot of early Egyptologists, when they were writing about ancient Egypt, they believed that because to them the epitome of civilization was ancient Rome, and then with all of these like monuments being unearthed and also deciphering hieroglyphics and being able to read the texts, they were like, oh, these must have been like a lost Caucasian white civilization that conquered Egypt, and that's how they were able to like build all of these grand monuments and build the pyramids and build all of these temples. And then they got extinct or whatever, and then the Egyptians stayed, and that's how like pharaonic civilization collapsed. And it's just again just tells you a lot about like their minds at the time, where like,
Mhm.
oh, like they literally could not conceptualize someone who, God forbid, is not white to have done anything of substantial value
Mhm.
in the ancient
Well,
world.
and so this is my ignorance on the subject. Just I'm curious, are there still extant examples of that ancient research? Like, do we have access to the archaeological records that were being done thousands of years ago? Um, and is modern Egyptology built on those records, or is this did we have to start all over at some point, and why?
I think these were mostly just like early scholars, so like mid 19th century, late 19th century scholars, like writing articles about who they thought the Egyptians were. Like, thankfully, I don't think anyone, at least for my knowledge, to my knowledge, like doesn't think that anymore. And like like a big part of Egyptology now is like trying to deconstruct a lot of the things that we need to unlearn and like decolonizing the field in different ways because of our colonial history. So no, I don't think it has any like remnants today, at least in like Egyptological scholarship, which is great. But yeah, but I think to your point about museums, for example, like even I think I always say like even if the museums do not want to give back like objects that have been blatantly like stolen due to colonization and taken out illegally, I always say, like, so for example, like the museums in the UK are all for free. But like if I want to go to the Louvre, I have to pay. If I want to go to the Met, I have to pay. And I think not just to Egyptians, but I think any museum collection, any museum abroad that has large collections from a foreign country, they should provide free entry to the nationals of these countries. Because
Mhm.
you don't just own the intellectual property and the physical property, you are actively cashing in money. You are actively benefiting on a daily basis from your colonial history by getting people to pay good money to come and see artifacts that were made in a country that is not yours by people who are not you. You go to the gift shop and like any gift shop, any museum gift shop, half of the stuff that are being bought are all ancient Egyptian like stuff. Like
Mm.
a cat, a teddy bear, I don't know, a mummy pen, a notebook that has the face of King Tut on it. And so you're making good coin out of like your active participation in this legacy. I understand repatriation can be complicated or political or whatever, but I think as institutions there is a lot that they can do that they're not doing that could kind of help the situation. And I'm also not calling for like everything to be back. Like I think we don't have the capacity, number one, or the infrastructure to take everything back because it's like a lot.
Mhm.
But I think certain important things should be coming back. Like my former boss, Dr. Zay Hawes, who was the first Minister of Antiquities, he's calling for like the return of the Rosetta Stone and the bust of Nefertiti, Zodiac of Dandara, because we have documented proof that they were taken out illegally. Like Borchardt, like kind of like wrote wrong documents and labels for the boxes when they were doing the partition. So like dividing, so it like up like back in the day they used to have this partition or partage deal or like law where an excavation could take 50% of what they are like uncover and Egypt keeps 50%. But part of that was like unless it's like a unique piece, then it stays in Egypt. So a lot of the stuff that were taken out were part of these active legal excavations. But then, mind you, again, all of these excavations were given access through the French head of antiquities. It was never an Egyptian who was in charge of the whole thing. But let's
Yeah.
say it's okay, like we will accept that. Borchardt forged the documents. No one saw the bust of Nefertiti, and that's how he took it to Germany. The Rosetta Stone, for example, like I didn't get to see the Rosetta Stone, which was like the key to deciphering the ancient Egyptian language script and the like birth of Egyptology as a modern discipline until I was like 27. And just because, again, I was privileged enough to be in the UK, to be in London, and to go see it. And it's like not just an integral part of my discipline, but also of who I am as an Egyptian. Like these are like iconic masterpieces. It's like, and I was only 27 when I got to see it, and most Egyptians won't even get to see it in their lifetime because, again, how do you get to the UK as Egyptians where we have to like apply for visas and most people get rejected and like you have to have X amount of money in your bank account? Like it's not like Egyptians have freedom of mobility because mobility is also a privilege that most of us don't get. So again,
Mm.
it's just like a very contested, complicated situation. But what I know for at least is that the current situation cannot stay as it is. And even on an institutional level, they can do things. And I think there's a lot of talk about like the grander political repatriation, which is very important. But until that happens, we can still look at like institutionally what can we do to kind of mitigate the situation or like make it better, or apart from like, oh, we're so sorry, but no,
Yeah.
because I feel that's the narrative.
Well, and on top of the things that are on display, I mean, there, like you said, the bust of Nefertiti and the Rosetta Stone, the Met has an entire temple. The things that are on display are one thing. You talk about the Louvre. The Louvre only has maybe an eighth of its collection on display. Everything else is in storage, underground, in other cities in storage. Like it's they have millions of pieces in their collection that no one has ever seen because there's just no room to to display it, and yet they
Mhm.
still don't want to give it to someone who has the room and the desire to display it. It just makes me so mad. But
Yeah, but also to note on the temple at the Met, it was actually, so the temple, that temple, it was part of the Nubia salvage campaign. So in the 60s, Egypt decided to like build a high dam in the south in Aswan,
mm,
but that would have kind of caused like the flooding of a big portion of Egypt south of Aswan. And it was like the biggest UNESCO salvage campaign ever. Like over 60 countries contributed, including the US. And as a thank
wow.
you for the US contribution, we actually gave them that temple. So
Oh wow,
that
I didn't know
temple is
that.
on us. That temple is on us. We did give it as a gift. And also
Okay,
the temple in
I'll forgive
Madrid.
the bet for that one.
Yeah, the temple in Madrid was also given to Spain as a gift.
Mm,
There's a temple there, I think Dunder or something. And yeah, it was given to them as a gift because also they contributed a lot to the Nubia salvage
mm.
campaign. So it's not all
So
bad, but most of it is.
okay, that's fair. But still, like, I mean, and we're not just talking about Egypt in those situations either. I mean, even um the Louvre is the most recent one I've been to just because I was living in Paris. I got lost in their Greco-Roman wing. Like I literally could not find my way out. That's how much stuff they have.
Hmm.
And I was there with my sister, and she commented at one point, and she was just like, "Is there anything left in Rome?" And I was like, "I don't think so." Like it's not just I. I'll get off my milk carton here in a second, but it's not just Egypt that has had this issue. Um, Colonialism screwed over a lot of a lot of countries, and then museums like to use that as a no, look, we're trying to teach people about all these cool places, and it's like, okay, but also there are
Yeah,
better ways you could have done that. um
exactly.
but I would like to talk about your research, and I, as interested as I am in ancient Egyptian history, I really don't have a lot of information because I haven't had time to sit down and really study. And what I do know, I know from modern American media, which I'm guessing the mummy isn't very accurate. Um, so I was just wondering if you could first off explain what settlement archaeology is, and then also in reading the articles you sent, you were talking about the Old Kingdom a lot, and I'm not sure what the difference between the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom is, and like what
Mhm.
time periods we're talking about there.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So basically, ancient Egypt is divided, or like the history of ancient Egypt is divided two ways. So again, similar to what you said when like there were actually Egyptologists in ancient Egypt, the ancient Egyptians themselves were fascinated by their own history and recording their own history. So the first kind of like way of us dividing the history comes to us from ancient Egypt, from the Ptolemaic period. So Alexander the Great, the Alexander the Great, conquers Egypt in 332 BC. And with that, like the then dynastic rule ends, and then when he dies, Egypt is given to one of his generals, Ptolemy, and then the Ptolemaic period starts. We have set 17 Ptolemaic kings, ending with the famous Cleopatra, and then in 30 BC, ancient Egyptian civilization ceases to exist, and then will become part of the Roman Empire. But so basically, the second king in that Ptolemaic era, Ptolemy II, brought this priest. His name was Manetho, an Egyptian priest, and he was like, "I want you to write me a history of Egypt." So Manetho went around looking at all of the accessible materials that he had because the Egyptians themselves would record these things called king lists. So, for
Mhm.
example, the Temple of Abydos that Seti I built, who's the father of Ramses II, so that's like 1400 BCE, or like Ramses the Great. They have like a section in the temple where they record the name of every single king, starting with King Menes, the founder of the Egyptian state, or the one that we at least have recordings for. And for example, so he used these kings lists. We have also like different papyri. So we have like a Turin papyrus that has names of kings for like the earlier periods. We have a stone called the Palermo stone because it's in Palermo, and it also has records of these kings with the reigns and like what each year kind of what like the main events of each year. And these are the sources at least that survive to us today. Probably Manetho had better resources, but basically Manetho split Egyptian history into 30 dynasties, so from 1 to 30. And dynasties did not necessarily negate, like, sorry, constitute like one ruling family. Like sometimes he would split the dynasties based on architectural and innovations or political situations that were shifting. So he didn't have one clear idea of why he kind of split these dynasties. But that was one thing that we use from Manetho, from the Ptolemaic period. And then when Egyptology became a discipline with the decipherment of hieroglyphs in 1822, we kind of added another layer of that where we decided to do pre-dynastic period, early dynastic period, and then Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, late period. In between each kingdom, there's what we call intermediate periods. So the kingdoms, it's always when there's like one unified ruler ruling all of Egypt from the delta to the south. And like the southern border usually fluctuated, but let's say it's like Aswan was the most consistent like southern border because that's where you start getting the Nile cataracts. So these are like all the kingdoms. And then intermediate periods. So for example, the first intermediate period, Egypt was split between the north and the south. So they had different rulers. Second intermediate period, we were ruled by the Hyksos. So the Hyksos who come from the Levant invaded Egypt and then ruled the Delta. So all intermediate periods are periods of like political strife or contesting monarchs, usually between the north and the south. So what I focus on, at least for now, is the Old Kingdom period. So that's roughly like 1200, 2500 BCE up until like 2100 or 2000 BCE. That's roughly the time frame that I work with. So that's the Old Kingdom period. And then I specifically look into settlement archaeology. So settlements from the name, like to settle. So like it's places where people have settled. So usually like ancient cities or like domestic spaces in general. Like I'm very interested in like looking at ancient Egyptian history from a bottom-up approach and understanding more about just the average ancient Egyptian. And I think what better way to understand that than to understand the spaces in which they occupied. Also, like this whole idea of domestic space, like we shouldn't be thinking of houses as we think of houses today. Like houses were much more dynamic, I think, and much more fluid in their function. So like, and you can still even see that in like rural areas in Egypt where like even though you have a house, but then in the back you have like an oven where the family or the household like they bake their own bread and like they grind their own grain and they make their own flour. So there is also like there like I think the way we look of houses today as like purely domestic in that sense, I think didn't necessarily apply a lot, not just to ancient Egypt, but to the ancient world where things were much more dynamic in the house. And yeah, so that's mostly what I focus on. And then I'm particularly interested again in identity and like how identity was kind of created, contested, negotiated, and like shaped throughout history.
I mean, so that brings up just two things for just two things, a lot of things, but two specific things for me in terms of I think it's so easy to say that history is thousands of years old, but then you start realizing like as an American living just in southern France and
Hmm.
having Roman uh ruins around, and realizing that the city I'm living in is 2000 years old blows my mind. Like I can't even imagine what like growing up in a city where you have ruins that are 6000 years old. Like like I just that amount of time is so mind-boggling to me, which is also why I don't understand how someone could say that a society doesn't know how to take care of itself when it's been around for that many millennia.
Sorry.
Like the
Yeah.
longest running single
Yeah.
civilization in history. Like we talk about ancient China like it's the oldest thing and this incredible thing that we should look up to, which I'm not saying we shouldn't, but ancient China is younger than ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
And yet we still look at Egypt as this kind of backwards third world country in the US at least. It's
Mm. But
really
then I think
wild to
it
me.
goes back to our previous conversation where I don't think people look at modern Egyptians and think, oh, you are the ancient Egyptians. It goes back to this whole idea of like earlier scholars thinking that current Egyptians are like the Arab invaders that came with like the Muslim conquest of Egypt, and that the ancient Egyptians are this like lost civilization. And also, I think a lot of, like, at least that's my opinion, a lot of conspiracy theories about like how ancient people from Atlantis built the pyramids, or this built the pyramid, or that built the pyramid. I'm like, why? Like, I think inherently it's all embedded in the idea that like Egyptians are just not intellectually, mentally, physically capable of doing things that would actually be impressive to someone today.
Yeah.
And it's just like embedded in so many like racial understandings of like different ethnicities and different races, which is obviously very problematic. But yeah.
I mean, even when I was learning philosophy in undergrad, we would learn about these ancient Greek philosophers and moving forward. And then at the end of the semester, they were like, by the way, here are these four Egyptian philosophers who thought of all of the things that the Greeks thought of just 1,000 years earlier. And I'm like, then why didn't we study them? Like if it was their idea that the Greeks stole, it feels like we should be studying the people that came up with the ideas, not the ones who bastardized it. But oh yeah, it I that gets me hot under the collar. But then I guess my next question, if we're staying on track, if we're staying on track, my next question talking about I loved that you're talking about a bottom up approach in terms of looking at Egyptian society, because it seems like a lot of the research that's gone in has gone into the royals and looking at King Tut and Cleopatra and all these names who, yes, are important, but who were supported by many thousands of their their slaves and their
Yeah.
normal everyday people. Um, but what I'm wondering then is what is the difference, and I'm asking this question as a sociologist and ethnographer, what is the difference between archaeology and anthropology?
Between archaeology and anthropology, I think archaeology, we do a lot of like more dirty work. I think we
Mm,
excavate more than I would say anthropologists do. But also like I think within anthropology, because you have like social anthropology, agriculture anthropology, but then you have like forensic anthropology where
mm,
they do get their hands dirty. So I think depending on what you do, if that makes sense, they're very closely, I think, attached and intertwined, especially today. But I think a lot of our anthropologists would be less inclined to go to like actual fieldwork and actually excavate archaeological sites, not just
mm.
in Egypt, but in anywhere, because that's not necessarily their focus. And I think for archaeologists, we're more interested in like the ancient world than the modern world, I would say. I don't know. Like, but the lines are so blurred because also like I always say, like for
Mhm.
example, I'm an Egyptologist and an archaeologist, but then where do you draw the line between both? And also don't know where to do that exactly. But yeah, I think archaeology is more dirty work, hands-on stuff at on site, and more ancient focus. And I would say anthropology is more current focused. Or like you still have people, someone I think said this before to me, like anthropology, you can still do ethnographic work because the people you want to study are still alive.
That's fair.
Archaeologists, they do ethnographic work, but their people are dead. So they have to go to where they are. So they go excavate.
That's completely fair. Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
imagine doing my work with dead people. I
Yeah.
mean, I try. I hang out in cemeteries, but they don't usually talk back when I want them to. So,
Yeah. But they're so closely attached. And like, I can remember who wrote
mm,
this article, but there was an article that came up a few years ago, and it's like Egyptology is dead. And it was talking about how we have to traditional ways of approaching Egyptology is so
mm.
outdated, and we have to actually start incorporating anthropological and sociological like disciplines and theories into our work that would def help both of us. So
I mean, I think there's room for I think there's room for engaging in both lines of thinking in terms of I mean, I've talked multiple times on this podcast and will forever talk about this, but interdisciplinary research is absolutely the future. Because we have to be able to look at problems from multiple angles, and sometimes our specific uh area of discipline it gets really kind of one track minded and we forget that there are other things going on, and so tapping into other theories and other disciplines can help us kind of break out of our boxes a little bit. But also there's a reason why those disciplines were separated out in the first place in terms of the way they're talked about and the theories you use and the vocabulary you use. Like
yeah.
if I were to sit down with with an archaeologist like we are right now and you were to just go full archaeology mode, I would have a hard time understanding what you're talking about because the theories you use are completely separate from the theories that I work with.
Hmm.
um Although at the same time I say that I think spending some time in archaeology would help me because I spend a lot of my research hours in social media, and I think there's a direct line that could be looked at between physically digging up things from the dirt, as well as digging things out of the digital dirt.
Hmm.
Um, so that's just a reminder to me to, to get out of my own way and look into that, because I think there are things that I could learn from archaeology and how you approach finding that information from people who can't speak back to you,
Yeah.
and navigating an online space that's very text based.
Hmm. No, I definitely agree. And also, a lot of the theory that we end up doing, because Egyptologists notoriously hate theory, except if you're in the UK, because people in the UK love theory. But most of the theories we use are actually borrowed from sociology, from anthropology. Like,
Mm.
Egyptologists are usually criticized for like going like at 80% or 90% and not trying to like add this like theoretical lens that could just like take it somewhere different. But I mean, in the last like 30 to 40 years, a lot of people have been like doing that, which has been great, and like connecting things together and like looking at, again, as you said, like interdisciplinary like approaches to their work, which is just like giving us so much more knowledge without even having to excavate new things. It's like people reassessing, re-examining, looking back at like what previous scholars have done, not to their detriment or not to like anything against them, but like just given the resources they had then, we know so much more now, and our disciplines have expanded so much, which is the beauty of research, no? Like it's the beauty of
Yeah.
academia, I guess. It's like always ever changing, ever growing, and there's always new things happening, and it's just like very, very engaging.
Yeah. I mean that's the joy of it. That's the fun part. Even I mean in terms of the things that I know about thinking about ancient Greek theater, how
Hmm.
for a long time we thought it was fully sung through. We thought that they were singing everything they did on stage, which is how opera was invented, because they had a basic misunderstanding about Greek theater. And so it gave birth to this whole new type of art. But then people later on went back and re-researched. They were like, wait a second, we read this wrong. Let's do this again. And that can happen. And it doesn't mean that the previous research was bad, like you were saying. It just wasn't as accurate as it could have been because they didn't know any better.
Exactly.
Um, so one of the things that you were talking about in the articles that you sent that that challenged my perceptions of ancient Egypt was that beer was a big thing in ancient Egypt. I don't know why, but I never considered that beer would be the alcoholic drink of the area, even though that's where wheat comes from. For
Yeah.
some reason, I think just old movies have tainted my knowledge of the area. And I was like, of course, it was just wine. Everyone always had wine down there. But it it was, and then in the same article talking about bread and beer being made in the same place also makes
Mhm.
sense because they're both yeast based products.
Exactly. And they both have like a fermentation element to them. But Egyptians, sorry, in Egypt, we notoriously don't have good grapes. We don't have good grapes to make wine. So most of the wine consumed in ancient Egypt, and actually one of the earliest evidence of writing in ancient Egypt comes to us from all of these like Palestinian, Lebanese amphoras that were full of wine from the Levant because they have amazing grapes.
Yeah.
We still produce our own wine, but it wasn't best quality. And for beer, it wasn't just like for like as an intoxicating drink, because if you think about it, beer is also very nutritious. It's full of calories, and especially the way they used to do it in the ancient world. So it was number one, a form of wage payment because there was no money, and they were paying the workers with bread and beer, and that's how you would get paid. And even some, especially in later periods, in like the New Kingdom period, for example, so like 1500 BCE, we have like payment lists of like, oh, this draughtsman is getting X amount of beer jars per week or per month for his work, or like, oh, they missed 2 days, so deducting this from his thing. And then they would either like usually pay you in grain as well, so you can process it. And again, takes us back to this whole like in domestic spaces, in households, then the maybe like people would then use that grain to produce their own bread and beer. But no, it was a staple food and it was very nutritious. It was also safer to drink beer in the ancient world than to drink polluted water sometimes. And also the River Nile back then was like full of like wild creatures. Like you had crocodiles and hippos and I don't know what. So it was also dangerous to just like walk around by the Nile River banks every time you got thirsty, you know? So it was also this idea of like collecting large portions of water, taking it to be used in the beer making process, and just like depending on that, if that makes sense.
Wait, so you said there was no money. How from a from a capitalistic mindset, how does society function if there's no money? Like how, especially a society like like ancient Egypt, where there was so, it seems like there was such distinct strata of the classes, and there were so many different classes going on. How did that work?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research that has been done in like ancient Egyptian economics, and we know much better from like later periods than earlier periods. But think of it as like as like a complex barter system that worked. And even though like ancient Egypt was really active in terms of like conspicuous consumption and shows and like showing their wealth, apart from that, like the daily needs were not as much as like for us. But
Mm-hmm.
I think they, apart from like being paid in kind, they were given either access to resources or they just bartered. But we're not sure of like what kind of system, like, oh, one cucumber equals a carrot and a tomato, for example, or like two
Mm.
tomatoes equals half a kilo of onions. Like, we're not necessarily sure how these things worked, especially in earlier periods, but somehow it worked. And they didn't really need money to do that. And then in later periods, we get to see, for example, like silver as being a value of wealth. So like measuring things like with like a counterweight that is metal, that was also an indication of like, okay, this is worth this much or this is worth that much. Also, sometimes they would relate it to like plots of land. So like, oh, you will work for this, I'll give you like an aurora of arable land, for example. Or like if a king wanted to kind of gives something to a royal official or just an official who like to like reward them, they would usually give them like land that they could use, probably inherit like give as inheritance to their children as well. So there, I think resources were much more valued than we think it was in the ancient world, and they could easily utilize this to their own benefit, like economic gains, if that makes sense.
I mean, that's both encouraging to hear and wild to hear, just because I think, for me at least, when I think about that kind of system, that kind of economic system, it makes sense on a very small scale, with small communities being able to work like that. But to think of a country that big and that
Mm.
influential being able to function without money blows my mind, but also gives me so much hope that that could happen again if people
Yeah.
actually were willing to make it happen.
Yeah, no, so the course I'm teaching this semester, it's called Inequality in the Ancient World. And like I'm TFing the course with a professor, he's an Assyriologist, and a big part of the course is just like us trying to look back at the history of inequality or the origins of inequality. And we've reached to a level now at the course with the students. It's an undergrad course where we've realized that there's actually no origin to inequality, and this whole idea of like trying to look at the origin of things or when did things start was not real, and how we as human beings were so flexible in terms of like our modes of social engagement, our modes of economic structures that governed us. And like we always tend to think of like societies developing from like bands to tribes to chieftains to states, which is actually not real. And you have evidence of like from anthropologists of different tribes who like depending on the season they would go from like small bands to chieftains. But also, for example, with money you have also small communities and small societies that didn't at all need money, who used like shells for money or beads for money, and even things that maybe you would think of like, oh, it's a cute shell on the beach, or like, oh, that's a nice bead like necklace or whatever. To them it was actually money. And even though they didn't necessarily need to have money as like a very small community, they just decided to do that. And in Egypt, for example, as you
Mm,
said, like such a vast country functioned without money. So I feel there's like, I think as modern humans, we're so stuck on the way we are living as like the only way that makes sense. This is the only way things can
mm,
work. When actually, so like now what we're asking in class is like, why have we become stuck? So this
mm,
is now currently like the vibe of the class where like I think, or what the professor is trying to do that I'm TFing is like, oh, we're now stuck. We're in a period of history where we're stuck. Like the humans have been much more inventive and creative with how they run things or how they want to engage in things. And I feel now we're just stuck. And as you said, like you just can't imagine an
mm.
alternative option or and I completely get it. Like even before I started like learning more about this, I was like, oh wow, like I didn't know any of this. Like what is happening?
I mean, it just, I'm always brought back to this thought that humans have been around for tens of millions of years as an overall species,
Hmm.
and we only really know maybe the last few hundred years of it for a fact, and then the last several thousand as general concepts. And yet we somehow think that we are the epitome of what humans are supposed to be at this point, and we don't need to change anything. Like,
Yeah.
it just, that's why I love being in places where I can be around ancient ruins and go to museums where I can have the ability and the capability to touch like ancient stones and things like that, and try to connect with a past that we don't fully understand, just as a
Mm.
reminder that that I mean, just to make it personal, like I'm not where the human race has led up to. Like I'm not. I'm not the end all be all of the human race, that I'm just one piece in a very long story that we have very little information about. And it just excites me, and it's so much more interesting to think about my life in that way, that it puts less pressure on me. And instead of
Yeah.
thinking, oh, I have to do something important with my life because the crux of history depends on every little thing I do, and really think, oh, actually, 30 million years ago, when the first Homo, whatever it was, stood upright, it they weren't thinking about 30 million years down the line,
Yeah.
me sitting here in front of a computer. They were just trying to figure out how to keep from falling over. Like,
Yeah. Or probably reach this fruit that they wanted to eat
exactly.
from the
Yeah.
tree.
There's just it takes so
Yeah.
much pressure off of the daily living. And that's also why I love research like what you're doing in looking at the day-to-day interactions, and seeing like the tablets of the teenagers that are complaining to their parents about not giving them new clothes for the school year because their friends all got new clothes back in ancient Rome, or um the copper merchant who sent bad copper to his client, and just things
Mhm.
like that, where we can see that humans have always been humans, that we're always the same, we're always complaining, we always think we're the most important over millennia of existence.
Yeah, exactly. And
uh
also not only from Egypt, because like in Mesopotamia, they have much more rich textual evidence of like the clay tablets and or the cuneiform tablets
mm,
because they are better preserved because they're clay. Oh my God, like they have such a wealth of like what you exactly said, like day-to-day interaction, just like, and it's like sometimes it's like so sassy, or like people are
yeah,
like a man and his wife are like fighting. She's like, you have left me for 3 months and you said you will give me the grain. I have no grain. Your kids are starving. Where are you? Come back. And I'm like, wow, this is like humans are just humans. Humans are just
yeah.
humans.
And
Yeah, it's insane.
that's the kind of research we need to be doing. I think that's what's going to get us out of being stuck. I think the post-industrial revolution, we've been stuck, like you said, in this mindset of this is how it has to be because this was where evolution was leading us. We've made it. Look at that.
Mhm.
And I think the only way we're going to get out of that rut is to realize that what we think of ourselves is exactly how each era, each epic
Yeah.
of people has thought about themselves.
We are a phase, we're not the end.
Yeah.
We can be stuck. And also that's why it's very important to learn history. Like when people tell you, oh no, it's that's why it's important. Because we actually need to learn these things and knew these things about our humanity, our collective humanity. That's why history in all its shapes and forms are very important.
Mm. What is what are you ultimately hoping to come up with through your PhD work? Like, uh, what are your research questions, or just what is it that not and this isn't me saying that education has to have a purpose. Like, I
Mhm.
very firmly stand in my belief that education is an end, it's not a means to an end. But if you were able to use your research as an encouragement to future scholars or people at large, what is it that you hope people get out of it?
I think on a like deeply personal level, one of the things that like at least throughout being a student or engaging in the discipline have shown me is that like I usually get like this comment that like, oh, I'm the first Egyptologist that people meet in their lives. And I think if anything, because we don't have a lot of people from Egypt in the field, I think I'm
Mm,
a big true believer in representation. So I think the number one thing that I want to do is like just be a good representative to Egyptians or hopefully potential Egyptians who want to get into the field and don't see themselves in the field because that was an issue that I had when I was entering the field where I was like I don't see anyone like me. I don't see anyone speaking the same language as me. I don't see myself here. So maybe this is not a field for me because it's already not like very attractive in terms of like return on investment, for example. Like it's already a very unattractive discipline to enter, and then just going into it and not finding people who are like who could just come from a similar background, I think can be very disheartening or discouraging for people. So I just want to be like a good representation to other Egyptians, hopefully, who want to be part of the field professionally and academically to like continue on, because I think it can be very demotivating to do so.
Mhm.
But I think ultimately I just want to demystify ancient Egypt to the world. Like, I think there's a lot of, again, like, oh my God, I never understood these things or I never knew these things beyond pyramid. Because as you said, like everyone thinks of monumentality, everyone thinks of pyramids and tombs and King Tut, which are all important because then they grab the attention. They grab the attention. Fascination is important in my field. Once I grab it, let me demystify certain things for you then. Let me show you the things that we know. Like for example, when people I always get like the question, oh, who built the pyramids? And I'm like, we know who. We have their tombs. We have the pyramid builders village that was found in 1982. And they're like, what? Really? When? I'm like, I don't blame you, but if you actually cared, like
Yeah.
if this was like such a mind-boggling question, people just go to YouTube and read like very interesting people's or hear in very interesting people's like viewpoints based on vibes. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is not a vibes field. This is an academic, scholarly discipline. So yeah, I just want to demystify ancient Egypt in general to the general public. And I love ancient Egypt so much, and like I hope that I can like infect my passion or my love to ancient Egypt to other people as well, I guess.
That's something that I'm starting to realize the more researchers I talk to, especially researchers from places outside of the United States and outside of England and outside of Western Europe, is that the as humans we are so much more likely to just come up with our own mythologies to explain things rather than actually ask questions of the people who have the answers for them. But then also just it's crazy to me that we're just willing to say, oh, I don't know how that happened, I guess it must have been aliens, and just lean on things like that because it sounds interesting and it sounds like a cool story, when in reality the true stories are so much more interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, and also another thing I feel like a lot of people tend to like to believe, like as you said, like these like fantasy theories, even when like you talk to them and they're like, well, I read this YouTube video though. And I'm like, well, okay. Okay. Does it okay. Just like
Great, I'm
everything,
glad you saw that.
yeah, everything we've done just like down the drain. I guess the YouTube video is more important. But yeah, I totally agree. It's actually when you understand how things are so consciously decided for and made than like just
Mm.
saying, oh, aliens or whatever. There's also a dolphin theory, apparently, that dolphins built the pyramids. I don't know. It's crazy. There's a kite theory. There's a kite theory that they use kites to place the stones. Like if you go into that dark part of the internet, you just get like very, very creative, let's just say creative ideas on how pyramids were built. But no, if you actually, as you said, like if you actually look into the realities of things, it's much more interesting, it's much more dynamic, but it's also much more human. And again, like as a collective human race, I think it like can help you connect with these things even more when you realize that it was just other human beings. Forget about Egyptian, not Egyptian, from here, from there, just human beings. They were just human beings who were just thinking and doing things and trying to serve a certain religious kingship ideology, and that's how they did it. And let's appreciate it for what it is and not fantasize it.
It's the infantilization of ancient peoples that bothers me so much. It's the belief that because they lived in the past from us, they must not have known as much as us,
Hmm.
and therefore they couldn't have been smart in any way, shape, or form, which is
Hmm.
crazy to me considering we wouldn't have any. of our fields of research. We wouldn't have math, we wouldn't have science, we wouldn't have literature. We wouldn't have anything if people before us hadn't started it, hadn't figured
Yeah.
it out. So then to go back and say, well, they weren't smart because they didn't understand high level calculus. Well, no, but also they knew other things that we don't know, and they could have known some of these things just in a different way and with different
Mhm.
understandings of the knowledge. So yeah, it's, I mean, and of course racism plays a huge role in people not wanting to believe that certain people groups were
Yeah.
just as intelligent, if not more intelligent than us now. Just yeah, it's, we have so much to learn from our past, and I wish people would be more willing to understand that the people back then were just as smart as us and
Yeah.
just
But
as
then
human as us.
I think that's why like this podcast is very important, or like trying to like engage with people on their own platforms, because I think as academics, I think we tend to be very insular. We think of all of these things and we're like, oh my God, this is so revolutionary, this is so whatever. But then it like stays within the bounds of a conference, or
Yeah.
stays within the bounds of a very expensive, journal article that like only people in your field and maybe, I don't know, history will buy and read. So I think that's
Mhm.
why like added responsibility on people like us today is like we need to engage with people where they're engaging.
Yeah.
Because
Well, and
it,
I was just to add on to that, I think it's also, it's been such a joy for me to have this podcast because I get to read what my guests write, and then I get to hear them talk about it, and it's two
Mhm,
completely different vocabularies, two completely different syntaxes, just in terms of we're taught such specific ways to write academically, and that academic writing is not necessarily accessible to people outside of our fields, let alone to people who aren't in academia at all. So to be able to sit down and be like, yeah, this doesn't make sense to me, or I don't understand this term, is such an important thing that everyone needs to be able to do. And
mhm,
I wish everyone felt that they were allowed to do that. I think there's also that disconnect between academia and the rest of the world, that non-academics feel like they're not allowed to question academics because they must be so smart and out of
mhm.
reach, when in reality we're just sitting here
Yeah,
talking the same way everyone else talks.
literally.
Well, let's use that as a chance to move into my synthesis questions. Yay.
Yeah.
So this is a series. This is a series of 7 questions that I ask all of my guests.
Okay.
Um, so don't think too hard about it, just whatever comes to mind first. So question number 1, what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Hmm. I think I like to just like meet up with friends, go grab dinner and yap. Uh, and I love, it's not really rest, but I like whenever I want to like stress relief, I just go into the city. I just go to New York because I live in New Haven, so it's like a 2 hour train
Mm,
ride. So whenever I feel like it's a bit too much or like I just want to relax a bit, I just go to New York and hang out with friends there.
nice. What is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Okay, hot take because most people think it's weird. My bedroom. I love studying in my
Mm,
bedroom. Not on my bed, like I have my desk and like my setup. I just love studying in my room because I think I'm such a vocal thinker. I tend to like talk to myself a lot. I don't know. I'm a Pisces too, so like I just tend to like want to daydream and think and do things out loud. And like have a blackboard and like with like sh with pen with like Sharpie pens and I write down things. So and like my spread of books. So it's very hard to do that in the library. So you'll never see me in the library actually at all, except if when I'm checking out books. But yeah, I my bedroom.
I'm so jealous. If I stay at home to research, it never gets done. I have to
Yeah.
be in a library because then I have people who are looking at me like, why are you not sitting down and researching? Uh, what is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this could be good or bad.
Hmm. Um, I think honestly, I've been very lucky and very blessed to have like great mentors throughout. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I remember one time I was talking to one of the two Egyptian professors that I had in undergrad, but this was like maybe 2 years ago because we're very close and we still like stay in contact. And her name is Mariam Ayed, and I was telling her how sometimes I feel uncomfortable that like I feel like I have all of these privileges to study at all of these institutions. And I feel very bad that like maybe someone who has less privilege, who's also Egyptian, could have done better had they had the same opportunities as me. Because I feel like a lot of added pressure from like the outside world to like perform or something as an Egyptian in Egyptology. Like because we talk about all of these pressures as Egyptian Egyptologists and what people expect from you. And she was like, well, Hassan, she said this thing that really struck with me. And she was like, Hassan, look at everyone who also went to your undergrad university and what did they amount to? Like, not like people can be given the same resources and that's not a recipe for success. What you do with the resources you have is what makes you successful. So I think like her underlying like advice was like don't gaslight yourself and stop doubting yourself because I think it was like my imposter syndrome, for example, like kicking in and being like, well, maybe I'm just lucky. Maybe I'm just here because I like these were the good cards that I was dealt and not because I'm actually like smart or actually deserving. And she just gave me a reality check. She's like, Hassan, I understand as an Egyptian in the field this can happen, but you were given certain cards and think of what you did with these cards. So I think that would be something that maybe if the inner demons are lurking, which they usually are, especially at 2 a.m. in the morning when you're working on something and you think that you're just here out of luck or by chance, be like, no, the cards I was dealt, I had active agency in using these cards to my benefit.
Like
So
that.
yeah.
And I think I needed to hear that too. So thank you. If you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
Huh. I really love gender theory and gender studies, and that's like something I kind of dabble with on the side, with like identity and on because like gender is part of identity as well. But I think if I wasn't into settlement archaeology that much, I think I would like get more into like gender feminist theory and then apply that in Egyptology. So like be a crossover between, I guess, sociology, Egyptology, but more leaning towards sociology because I love sociology.
That's one thing I love about gender studies is it could be anything. You can do
Mhm.
gender studies in anything. Who is one other academic whose research you really admire?
Well, apart from all of my professors and mentors who I greatly admire, I really love Barry Kemp. He's an Egyptologist, and I just really love how he writes again accessible literature, and he really weaves a human storyline into all of his work, and then he has really revolutionary or like when he I mean he passed away recently, but like a lot of the stuff that he published when he published it was very revolutionary and just again added such a human level to his work, which I really appreciate. And another person that I've been obsessed with her work recently, Amanda Podani, she's an Assyriologist. She's the one who did her recent book is Weavers, Scribes, and Kings. She also did Brotherhood of Kings. And again, she just like breathes life into these like characters and the way she articulates herself on paper. It's just like so amazing. I just love her work so much. So yeah, these two people I would say.
What is a question that you've never been able to answer?
A question I've never been able to answer. So many. Interesting. Like in Egyptology,
In just in general, it can be in your field of study, or it could be another question.
and a question I've never been able to answer. So in the ancient world, some of the earliest like evidence for human representations are always these clay or whatever stone, like female figurines, and they're usually very voluptuous. They usually are naked with like big breasts, very wide hips. Uh, and you see it throughout. You see it consistently in any culture on every single continent. But it's not because of like trade or transmission of ideas. It's not because of that. Like these individual cultures were thinking about these things, not sometimes at the same time, but also sometimes at different times. And no one knows why this was happening. And I'm really dying to know because I just feel like I don't know. I just feel something about this. There's much more to know about it, but also
Mm.
no way for us to find out why these figurines were so popular, or why did these figurines pop into people's heads, regardless or irrespective of where they were. And it just fascinates me so much. I just really want to know.
I feel that there's so many places, there's so many things that were thought of by multiple people groups across the globe uh at a time when they didn't have the ability to communicate with each other, that are so similar. Like that's one of the reasons, and I'm not going into detail about this, but that's one of the reasons why dragon myths really interest me, because every culture seems to have one at a time when those cultures wouldn't have been having any kind of trade or any kind of communication with each other.
Mm,
And I want to know what in the human mind made us go there. So very similar. I
yeah.
totally get what you're saying. And then, okay, so and then the last question: what font do you wish you could present your research
I think it's a bit basic, but I just love Times New Roman 12.
in? Okay. Okay, fine.
Sorry. It's just so soothing to the eye. I don't know. I love Times New Roman 12.
And where can people find you online?
People can find me online at Hassan the Egyptologist on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for talking with me today, and we will talk to you all later. Bye. Just want to say a huge thank you to Hassan for being on the podcast. It took us a while to get here, but we finally did. And I'm so glad we got to have this conversation. And I'm so glad you all were here to listen to it. I hope that you learned something just like I learned something. And I I just look forward to so many more episodes like this. I just get so excited talking to people about the things that they're passionate about, and I want to keep doing this for so many years. So please be part of it, please. If you have questions for me or for my guests, feel free to send those in on an email. You can email those to podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. You can send an audio message to us at speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. Or you can send them to us on our Instagram at hypothesispod. You can also find me on Instagram at Ira A. McIntosh, or you can find me on TikTok at The Gay Ethnographer. You can find, as always, the episode articles on my Substack. The Substack is iramcintosh.substack.com. And anything that we talk about on this podcast will be on there. Eventually, I'd like to get the transcripts for the episodes up on there as well. I just don't have time right now, unfortunately, to go through those transcripts that Zoom provides and fix them up and get them ready. So hopefully with your support, I'll be able to do that soon. Speaking of support, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And when you listen to the episodes, please download them first. That's how we get the numbers that will help us find more financial support. And while I don't want to have lots of ads on this podcast, having those numbers are going to help me in terms of figuring out if I need to start a Patreon for this so that you can support monetarily, or just find new ways to get sponsors for the podcast in multiple ways. So your support in that way helps. Please, please share this podcast with friends. And let's fight misinformation together. Everyone have a great day and go read a book. Goodbye.